there. And thanks so much for joining me. It's Thursday. We're here in May, beautiful May, and I'm out enjoying my outside world. Here I love the weather is beautiful. It's nice and springy. And I am enjoying a Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand. It's called Satellite. It's 2020. So this one is a really good one. And I've had it before, but I had to get it again because it was really a treat. So we're going to go ahead and get into chapter 3 of the Last Consort Escape. This is book 1 of the Last Consort series. All right, here we go. Chapter 3. Patricia couldn't help but feel uncomfortable talking over the phone. It seemed as if William had rubbed off on her. Although it had been several years, she knew that she was marked, priced as dispensable by a group of monsters she knew nothing about, or so she tried diligently to believe. She finally understood William's hesitancy with the thought. She stood before the brown-tiled counter of her tiny kitchen, pressing into a grilled cheese sandwich to make it manageable for smaller hands. Her wrists were tense. She knew she was anxious. It was obvious as she handled the tomato for salad on the cutting board. The impact of her words she would soon share with Christine had been playing with her thoughts in strange scenarios acted out by faceless shadows cast in her mind. Why did she trust the mysterious man's words? What pull had she suddenly felt in her being? What haunted her after hearing his words? There were no miraculous lights glimmering from the heavens or voices of the great ancestors whispering in her ear to claim reason for the impression. It was all in her gut. It felt right. "Mommy, Auntie Chris is at the door," shouted Lisa, her tiny voice becoming boisterous as she ran from the living room to the kitchen and back again. Christine lived just a few blocks away. They shared an uncanny relationship, extremely close. They'd always been just like twins, completing each other's sentences and living within a yell's reach. "Hi, Lisa, Lisa. Look what I bought for you and your brother." She pulled a board game, Operation, from beneath the fabric. The bag was another limb to her. There wasn't a day that went by without her trudging the black and green luggage back and forth. "Operation," Lisa announced. "Now you can help the patient." With a smile, Patricia placed her children's sandwiches on the coffee table. "What do you say to your aunt?" "Thank you, Auntie Chris," they both chimed. "Are we eating here?" asked Lisa. "Yes, you two surgeons may eat in the living room while Aunt Christine and I go into the kitchen." She led her sister through the narrow doorway in need of paint to her small kitchen where she had lunch prepared. Events were so mixed up in her mind in hows and whys, the why she couldn't says and what would happen ifs. It all danced in an abstract swirl in her thoughts. How would Christine react? What did it all mean? What happened to her abrasive ways? Would she bring herself to ask the biggest question on her mind? Who, so, who is he? Christine began before she had a chance to sit down. Her whole walkover was probably paced by carefully crafted questions and anticipated answers. "His name is William. He's a nurse." She stopped with her simple answer, replaying the evening in her memory. Puzzlement struck her sister's face as she waited for more that Patricia had to prepare to give her. "William?" Christine questioned. "Are you sure he's the person at the cabin?" "Yes, of course. I never forgot his face." For some reason, confusion etched itself upon Christine's brow and lingered like a bad smell. "Well, did William tell you anything?" There had been a look in his eyes tagged at her question as she asked, almost begging her to stop his punishment. There was so much that she didn't know, that she couldn't ask, that she then wasn't sure she wanted to know. "I had every question ready. Then I sat down in front of him. Then it all came back to me that night. It was difficult." "So you didn't ask him anything? Is that what you're saying?" "No, I did ask him a question. It gradually became more difficult. Then I couldn't ask him." "What do you mean? Why did you meet him if you didn't ask him anything? What was the point?" Patricia recalled the multiple scars on his wrists, some darker and more jagged than others, and his dread of her having seen them. "I don't think I'll ever be able to understand what he's gone through." "What are you talking about? What about us? This is the first time we've even talked about that night. Did he say who sent him there?" "We may not want to even know that answer, Chris. There were scars on his wrists, Chris, from an attempted suicide. He didn't want to talk, but I know he wants someone to listen." "What did you want to counsel this guy? What did he want then if he didn't say anything?" "You don't understand what I saw." She thought about his averted glances, his nervous face swipes, and his absolute broken soul. "We're obviously still not safe. Our father damaged people. He hurt people and he's still doing it. Look, when you're faced with the truth, I just wonder if I can handle it. I need to give it time. I know he knows more than what he told me," which was nothing, Christine said sarcastically. "But what if that's the best thing?" There was silence between the two sisters. Only the words surrounding them continued as they stared eye to eye. Christine held a fork she used to stab a tomato and cucumber, the tines close to her tightly closed lips. Lisa laughed her energetic laugh, the sound overlapping the circus like music of a children's show. The laugh continued, joined by the voice of Alex, nearly mocking what she knew her sister hoped to hear. Had he spit on Christine's desires, extinguishing the fire of hope she had lit? What else could she have done? The children's laughs continued to swell, growing, filling the silent kitchen, filling her head as the reticence closed in on her. The best thing is to not know. We deserve answers, Pat. Something happened to you. Mom's behavior, why we had to move from home. You need to know who we're still running from. You couldn't do that to him? He was one of them, Pat. How could you even trust someone who came there in the first place? Pat, he is a key person in this whole mess. He may not want to tell you because it's incriminating to him. He knows a lot more than he's telling you. Chrissy, you know Dad was involved in something dangerous. Patricia recalled the time she suddenly became ill, her father's apathetic behavior in the room he forbade them to enter. She didn't know what her father did. One point had developed a sense of discomfort toward him. He was hesitant with every word. How many? 3? Patricia remained silent for a moment. Her sister was right to an extent. He answered why he saved them, but why did he save them? Who was he really? Should she have trusted his words? Then she thought about his presence and demeanor. He's not a threat. I'm wary to say who may be. You're wrong, Pat. He's dangerous. I know I don't know him. I know that what he has to say isn't the only side, even if it is a side, but I can say this much. He's not the one we should be questioning. They looked at each other. You can't expect me to force anyone to speak or control what he says. Christine returned to her salad, seeming to yield to the newfound understanding. Just be careful. You still don't know what all this means. She had been strong over the years. Pat had experienced hunger and pain and triumph. She withstood arguments and relationships, strengthening her soul with experiences. She wondered in a warm glow between sisters, in her home and her confusion. Would the straightening of her past make her fall limp, or would it give it a new look, new style? Was it best to leave it alone, allow it to develop naturally? They ate silently, afraid of continuing the conversation. She carefully planned her journey. She chewed, forcefully eating for the sheer sense of necessity, trusting nothing. End of chapter. Chapter 4. William sat up in bed. The afternoon sunlight leaked into the room despite his attempt at keeping it out with the drawn blinds. A dream had left him in a state where his equilibrium was off. Sitting up at the down navy comforter past his waist was like holding one's hands out toward a wall, telling his existence to give him a minute. He dragged his hand across his face, his model for stress relief. He'd been doing it for so long he almost was certain that one eye was lower than the other. He'd forced himself to gain 5 years. His hand swipe made him feel a little better for the moment. And the whole mess of whatever it was that was consuming him would splat right back at him like a rock in a slingshot from the backside of some brat with absolutely nothing to do. If only he could sleep through the day. He was waiting for it to surprise him. For once he'd get home after a shift in the afternoon, crawl into bed, doze off into a blank, selfless, open, vast nothingness that was slumber. But he couldn't control the haunted halls of his memories, where the spirits within the ethereal haze whispered what was hopelessly forgotten. The past 3 days had done nothing but robbed him of the opportunity. William leaned back and stared at the tiny textured mounds on the ceiling. He stared with the thought he forced his presence to dismiss the obvious realization that he already knew was eating at him. Grouping mounds above him for a minute, William counted groups of 3, white piles of gloop, then 5, then 6. Then he accepted that his activity was pointless. He sat up and pushed the comforter aside in frustration. Damn dreams. Why did she have to haunt his dreams? There in the doorway, he could feel dampness from sweat on his lower back. Funny how the body worked, how sleeplessness often left its toll on foreheads and armpits. He slipped a dark t-shirt over his frame and began toward the hallway. Patricia, the interrogator, the comforter, the genuine caring woman's essence lingered like a light perfume, gently tickling his thoughts. Her family, her questions, her determination acted as troubling taste in his mind. She was dangling a key to a passageway he had locked and ignored and had haunted areas uttered from his bowels. He couldn't do that to himself. The only option was to do what he'd been doing for so many years. If he moved, he would make it a second time in a year, a growing weakness he couldn't seem to remain permanent. The woman with the beaked nose, the determined stare, the grace of a primed ballerina, the magnetism of her presence tugged at him at a side he often ignored so hard that it physically burned. Crazy. He was going to give in. The tongue was more lethal than a bullet. She'd been so strong, stronger than he could ever have been. He'd never met anyone quite like her, and to vanish would be succumbing to the very existence he no longer wanted to accept. He understood. He understood what time had done to her. William floated from room to room, lost in his obsessions, lost in his nightmares, and inspired by a ghost. He walked with bare feet against the deep red floors of his apartment to the living room, unaffected by the chill settling in the small rooms. His jacket was sprawled at the back of the sofa. He fumbled through the pockets for a napkin he knew was there, found it, and took a moment amongst the quiet whispers of the room and went for a sketchbook and pencil. Pressing hard against the thick paper, he began to create an image. As the lines began to intervene and twist, he thought of the night she wanted to know so much about. She needed to know. He needed to know that she, of all people, knew, no matter what it did to him. The one secret he'd obsessed over for years, the one secret she needed so desperately, was the one that was slowly killing him. He couldn't die with such weight on his chest, but it was too dangerous to let her know everything. Then she'd be at risk, a bite. That's all he could share, and he would. He stopped as if enlightened by some yearning entity he often pushed away, the voices of angels, the hurried songs of unseen forces not felt by him. Did he deny their existence to ward off his pain? He often wondered if he truly believed, why he had been spared. He placed the sketchbook aside, breathing in a cleansing breath, contemplating. She had cried, as if all her suppressed emotions had come spilling out. It was because of him. Confession was his only solution to his restless self. End of chapter. Well, guys, that's it. So we had two short chapters today, and I thank you so much for being here, joining me, and I'm going to go ahead and get back to my glass of Sauvignon Blanc. So I would hope that you join me next week, and we can continue on until we actually reach chapter 5, and then we'll move on to book 2. Thanks again for joining me, and have a great rest of your week.